Is your name Amber?
It is.
Hey, Amber.
Wow, you win.
All
Double
right.
points for you. Oh, we're really going.
There you go, Amber. Do supercalifragilisticexpialidocious for people who couldn't see it on video before. You got it? Go.
Like that?
That was it?
That was it.
That was the fastest supercalifragilisticexpialidocious I've ever seen. You talk quickly.
With my hands and my mouth.
Go. What's up? What do you want to talk
All right,
about?
I have a question from my husband. He was there last night. He works night shift. So he gave me all of his whole list of questions, and I couldn't remember them. So I had him text me.
All right, there you go.
But I have one. He has a coworker who doesn't know the Lord. He's been having conversations with. He listens to a lot of your podcasts, actually, and has used a lot of different resources. But his coworker brought up the concept of how can our free will and God's foreknowledge exist at the same time?
Yeah.
How can free will and God's sovereignty coexist? Why does God allow suffering? And what role does the ripple effect play in his divine plan? Let's explore these profound questions and uncover biblical truths that provide clarity and hope.
People struggle with predestination and free will, and I think the key to understanding that both can exist at the same time is the fact that knowledge does not necessitate causality. What do I mean by that? Let's say a mother brings home her baby from the hospital, just born, and she puts the baby down to sleep at night. She knows at some point that baby's going to wake up and want to eat, right? But because she knows that, is she causing the baby to wake up and eat?
Absolutely not.
No. Knowledge does not necessitate causation. So just because God knows what we're going to do doesn't mean he's causing us to do it. When God elected to create this universe, he knew you and I would be standing here talking right now, but he knew we'd be doing it freely. So when he elected to create this universe, this was predestined to occur because he's outside of time, but we're still freely talking. So he hasn't overpowered our free will. He always knew, say, Adolf Hitler wouldn't be a Christian, and he always knew that Billy Graham would, but he did not cause Hitler to not be a Christian and Billy Graham to be a Christian. Other than, if you want to say, when he created this universe, he knew they would. In that sense, he had caused it. But they still freely chose to believe or not to believe. And the same thing is true with us. When God elects to create this universe, he knows how everyone's going to ultimately turn out. But we're still turning out the way we do freely. This is why my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, wrote a book called Chosen But Free. Because we are chosen in the sense that when he elected to create this universe, he elected the outcome, but we're also free because what we're doing here, we're still freely doing. In fact, I saw someone yesterday point this out. Let's suppose you could get into a time machine and go forward to tomorrow. And you saw that your husband went to a pizzeria and he ordered pepperoni pizza, right? And then you came back to today, and you know that tomorrow he's going to order pepperoni pizza, right? Are you causing him to order pepperoni pizza because you know he's going to? No. So when it gets to tomorrow, you were in the time machine, you went forward and saw him do it. He's going to do it, but he's still doing it freely. So God is outside of time. He knows what we're going to do.
Okay, so on the another version, like perspective of that, the Christian side, what about Calvinists?
Yeah.
Like, how do you, I guess, biblically argue that with Calvinists?
Well, I point out to Calvinists that Calvinists, depending upon what variety of Calvinists you're talking about, some of them believe we don't have any free will at all because they don't seem to understand that knowledge does not imply causation. They think if God is sovereign that we don't have any free will. I actually think God is more sovereign than they think, because I think God is so sovereign that he can get his will done through our free will. And this would be a morally bankrupt universe if we didn't have free will. It would also be immoral for God to judge us if he's causing us to sin, right? Which actually is the biggest problem with Calvinism on my viewpoint. It makes God the author of evil. It makes God basically Allah, that Allah does everything. Well, if that's the case, this whole thing's a sham, right? So, and if God wants all to be saved, as the scriptures say, and God does all the choosing, why isn't everyone saved? Because we have free will, that's why. We have the ability to choose to believe or not to believe. And of course, if you want to have a moral universe, you got to give people free choice. Otherwise, it's not a moral universe. We're just moist robots. And that's not a moral universe.
Moist again, that's going to throw me off.
What's that?
Moist again, that's going to throw me off.
Yes, moist robots can throw you off. That's right.
Okay, I was listening to Felicia Masonheimer this morning. She did an interview with someone I don't remember. And she was kind of talking along this line, too, I guess, of some newer philosophy, like coming down the ropes.
Alicia Childers?
Felicia Masonheimer.
Oh, okay, sorry, go ahead.
She wrote, Stop Calling Me Beautiful. She's another apologist.
I always tell that to people. Yeah, stop calling me beautiful. Yeah. Actually, I've never
where's
said
your
that.
wife when we need her?
I've never said that in my life, but go ahead.
Okay. Thank you.
Never had to.
I really wish I had something clever to say right now, but I've got nothing.
Okay, that's okay.
Okay, I'll let you keep the mic. But she was going on kind of along these lines, too, of, I'm trying to remember exactly. I wish I remember the term. I might have to go look it up and see if I can explain it. I'm sorry.
Let me guess. Is she saying that we put too much emphasis on physical looks in this country and we have to?
No, it wasn't about her book.
Okay.
That Christians, I guess, leaning towards God puts everything, everything in order in the world, and because He is sovereign. I feel like it's pretty similar to Calvinism, but because He's sovereign, He's constantly putting things in the way so that even if you're trying to make your own will, you still can't, because He's going to. And I think the example they used was like someone's driving and they're going to go rob a bank the next day. And so that day a deer runs in front of their car and crashes they crash their car, so now they can't rob the bank the next day. And something to that effect of God's intervention into everything so that everything aligns with Him. Does that make sense?
Well, that's one theory, but that would pretty much take away our free will. For example, if God were to stop every murderer every time he tries to murder somebody, then this would be a morally this wouldn't be a morally robust universe. It would be comical, that every time you tried to do something evil, God stopped you.
So how do you go on the other side?
Consequences. What's that?
How do you go on the other side then when God does get involved and does stop things from happening?
Well, He may do that, and sometimes we can sense Him doing that, particularly in the Scriptures. And He might be doing it all the time right now, right? But we might not know it. But that doesn't mean He's taking away all our free will. In fact, most of the time when people talk about this in the context of whether Calvinism or Arminianism or Molinism, they will say, like Norman Geisler.
Molinism, that's what it was.
Yeah. My co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, would say that God does not work coercively, He works persuasively. So He persuades, but He doesn't coerce. And if He coerced, it wouldn't be a true following. You wouldn't really be loving someone who you can't coerce love. All you can do is be persuasive. C.S. Lewis famously said that God cannot ravish, He can only woo. If He's going to allow us to maintain freedom and allow us to love Him in a proper way, He can't ravish us. He can't just decide to take us over. He can only woo us. He can only persuade us. So God works in persuasive ways, not coercive ways. But, if God wants to intervene and stop something, some natural disaster, or He wants to heal somebody, He can do that, of course, anytime He wants. Those don't have anything to do with free will. Those things just sometimes happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So somebody who's, like, I've heard of this a lot especially with, like, abuse. Well, why didn't God stop that from happening? And they'll have even maybe later examples in their life that they felt God did intervene in their lives and stop something from happening.
Yes. What they're forgetting is something known as the ripple effect. That every event that occurs in this life ripples forward to affect trillions of other events. This has helped me understand, why does God allow a tragedy to occur that I can see no good coming from? Why does God allow a baby to die? The whole church prays and the baby still dies, right? This gentleman over here, blind. Why hasn't God healed him? I don't know why God hasn't healed him, but I know why I don't know why. Because I'm inside of time, God is outside of time. He sees the end from the beginning. What it was said about the guy that, I can't remember it now, that this happened in his life so that the glory of God could be seen. Why was this man born blind? Yeah, so the glory of God would be expressed in him. I don't know why God doesn't make everything right all the time, but I know why I don't know why. God may have a reason for allowing these sufferings and these pains to continue, because there's going to be a ripple effect that's not only going to affect the person, but everything else, and even long after. In fact, a baby dies today. Maybe that baby dying today ripples forward through a series of events, so 500 years from now, a great evangelist rises up and saves millions of people. Can I see all those ripples? No, but God can. So the ripple effect allows me to rest in God. In fact, you can see the ripple effect in the scriptures. The greatest ripple effect, of course, is Jesus. Why? Here's the only guy who's truly innocent who gets treated brutally. He's completely innocent, he gets treated brutally, yet it's the greatest ripple effect in history, that people are eternally saved from punishment and given his righteousness because of what happened to him. And then you see smaller instances of this, like when Joseph is sold into slavery by Judah and his other brothers. You remember what happens to him? He gets abused in Egypt, but then he rises to prominence somehow, puts a whole bunch of grain aside in order to have grain if a famine comes. And then the very people, his own brothers who sold him into slavery, leave Israel to escape the famine. They come to Egypt, and Joseph recognizes them. And what does he say as soon as he sees them? You dirty rats, you're going to pay for what you did to me. No, he doesn't say that. What does he say? He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives. In other words, the ripple effect occurred in their lives. They could see it. They did the evil. It rippled forward and helped them later. And I submit to you, if you think about your own life, there have been ripples that have occurred in your life that you didn't want to happen. You didn't want the wave that made the ripple, or the rock that went into the water that made the ripple, but that rock that went into the water rippled forward, and now you're going up. That bad thing happened back then, so this good thing could happen later. You've seen that. And most of the time, you don't see it.
That's good.
All right?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Amber. Rob.
Free will and God's foreknowledge. The coexistence of free will and God's foreknowledge is a profound mystery, but one that can be understood with careful thought. God's foreknowledge doesn't cause our actions. Rather, he knows them because he exists outside of time. This is like someone watching a movie they've already seen. They know the ending, but don't control the character's actions. Romans 8:29 tells us, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined, demonstrating that God's knowledge doesn't negate our freedom. Similarly, 1 Peter 1:2 speaks of believers being chosen according to the foreknowledge of God, affirming that God's plan works alongside human decisions without overriding them. Calvinism and free will. Some Calvinists argue that God's sovereignty leaves no room for free will, but Scripture paints a different picture. God's sovereignty and human free will coexist, making our choices morally significant. Joshua 24:15 invites people to choose this day whom you will serve. And Revelation 3:20 portrays Jesus standing at the door and knocking, waiting for a response. These verses imply that genuine choice is integral to our relationship with God. A world without free will would render love and worship meaningless. Free will allows us to freely choose God, which is at the heart of his desire for a loving relationship with humanity. God's sovereignty versus coercion. God's sovereignty is so complete that he can accomplish his will through our choices, not by overriding them. As C.S. Lewis explains in Mere Christianity, love cannot be coerced. It must be freely given. Romans 8:28 assures us that God works through all circumstances to bring about good for those who love him. While God can intervene when necessary, he respects the free will he has given us. This balance showcases God's sovereignty in a way that honors human dignity and moral responsibility. God's intervention in tragedy and suffering. Why doesn't God stop all suffering? The answer lies in the importance of free will and the greater purposes of God. Without free will, we would live in a morally hollow universe, unable to genuinely love or grow. The story of Job demonstrates that suffering can serve a purpose beyond our understanding. Job 42:5-6 shows Job's deepened relationship with God after his trials. Similarly, Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us that God's ways are higher than ours, and we may not always grasp his reasons. God's refusal to prevent every tragedy doesn't mean he's indifferent. It means he's working out a plan far beyond our comprehension. The ripple effect of God's actions. The ripple effect reveals how God can use negative events for good. Joseph's story in Genesis 50:20 illustrates this truth. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Similarly, the crucifixion of Jesus, an act of profound evil, became the means of salvation for humanity. Romans 8:28 assures us that God is working all things together for good, even when we can't see it. The ripple effect allows us to trust God's plan, knowing that he sees the end from the beginning. Further reading and resources chosen but free by Norman Geisler. A thoughtful exploration of predestination and free will. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. A classic that addresses free will and God's sovereignty. The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. Insights on Suffering and God's Plan. The Sovereignty of God by A.W. Pink. A deep dive into God's control and human responsibility. If you enjoyed this discussion, check out more videos on our channel where we explore questions about faith, suffering, and God's nature in depth.